Hallo Leute, heute bilden wir uns mal weiter, ne? Und gucken uns mal die furchtbaren Versionen der Erde an, die angeblich wirklich existiert haben. Warum wir das wissen? Keine Ahnung. Wieso sie wirklich existiert haben? Ich weiß es nicht. Ist da überhaupt irgendwas davon belegt? Kein Plan! Aber wir gucken uns die Scheiße jetzt an, okay? Und zwar ist es ein Video von Captain Cypher. Wie ihr seht, ich kenne die Person nicht. Ihr könnt also gerne in die Kommentare mal schauen. Da ist bestimmt ein Link in die Beschreibung für das Originalvideo und ein bisschen Liebe da lassen, wenn das Video gut ist. Wenn nicht, dann ein bisschen Hass da lassen. Das ist auch okay. Schauen wir einfach mal rein. The Giant Insect Swamp. Klingt schon mal crazy, crazy.
The giant insect swamp. If you have a phobia of bugs, this is officially your worst nightmare. Around 300 million years ago, during the Carboniferous period, Earth was covered in a massive, choking global swamp. But it's what was flying through the air and crawling through the mud that makes this era truly terrifying. During this time, the planet was experiencing a massive botanical boom. Plants and trees were pumping out so much
Eigentlich voll die gute Sache für den Planeten, denke ich, und für das Leben da drauf. Naja, das sagt die Insekten, schätze ich.
oxygen that the atmosphere was completely saturated. Oxygen levels skyrocketed to 35%, nearly double what we have today. And this hyperoxygenated air acted like a biological steroid for insects. Because bugs breathe through tiny tubes in their bodies instead of lungs, their size is strictly limited by how much oxygen is in the air. In this supercharged atmosphere, they
Interesting.
grew to monstrous apocalyptic proportions.
Hä, wie cool. Wir hatten also schon mal so Riesenkäfer. Oh, Mann. Stell euch vor, ihr könnt auf eine Libelle reiten. Wie spaßig wäre das?
If you stood in this swamp, you would be hunted by Meganura, a giant
Damn.
species of dragonfly with a wingspan the
Yo.
size of a crow. These weren't
Yo.
harmless bugs.
Voll
They were
cool.
apex aerial predators that used their massive jaws to snatch up primitive reptiles right off the ground. But the nightmare gets worse on the forest floor. Crawling through the rotting wood was Arthroplera, a giant armored millipede that grew up
So fucking cool, ehrlich gesagt. Ich würde gern so Riesensekten sehen. Aber sie wären halt auch sehr gefährlich, aber auch sehr cool.
to 8.5 feet long and weighed over 100 pounds. Imagine a centipede longer than a king-size bed, slithering
Bro.
through the dark shadows beside you. There were also scorpions the size of dogs and cockroaches as big as dinner plates. It was a
Damn.
world completely ruled by giant, scuttling, creepy crawlies. But this horror show eventually choked on its own success. The massive forest pumped out so much oxygen and buried so much carbon that they triggered a massive shift in the global climate. The planet cooled down, the intense oxygen levels collapsed, and the suffocating swamps dried up, finally shrinking these giant monsters down to the bugs we swat at today. The last glacial maximum.
Sehr interessant, dass sich das so selbst reguliert hat.
Around 20,000 years ago, Earth was locked in the grip of the last glacial maximum, a brutal, freezing era where runaway glaciers transformed the entire northern hemisphere into an unlivable wasteland. Driven by shifts in Earth's orbit, temperatures plummeted worldwide. Massive ice sheets began marching down from
Die
the Arctic,
Eiszeit.
swallowing up modern-day Canada, the northern United States, and large chunks of Europe and Asia. These weren't just standard winter glaciers. This was a crushing heavy armor of solid ice that grew up to 2 miles thick. The sheer weight of this ice sheet was so immense that it literally warped the Earth's crust, pushing the continents down into the
Das ist so
mantle.
krass.
Because so much of the planet's water was locked up in these massive frozen walls, global sea levels dropped by an astonishing 400 feet. This dramatic water loss caused the oceans to
Ich würde gerne wissen, was 200 Feet im Meter sind, damit wir das besser vergleichen können. Aber ich glaube, es sind mehr Meter, ne? Komm, wir machen uns mal den Spaß, ne? Wandeln wir mal Feet in Meter kurz um. Entschuldigung. Das war noch mein Duschsong. Ja, ich höre Musik beim Duschen. Macht ihr das nicht? Feet in Meter. Okay. 121 Meter. Wasseroberfläche einfach weg.
exposing
Das ist
millions of
crazy.
square miles of raw seafloor and
121.
turning Earth into a dry, dusty, and violent world. With the oceans shrunk and the climate frozen, the planet's water cycle broke down. Rainfall stopped almost entirely, turning vast regions into hyper-arid deserts. Ferocious, freezing winds screamed across the barren landscapes, whipping up apocalyptic dust storms that choked the atmosphere and blocked out the sun for weeks at a time. If
Crazy.
you tried to survive back then, you would be forced into a desperate, freezing migration alongside mammoths and saber-toothed cats. dodging relentless blizzards and hunting for
Muss so eine Scheiße gewesen sein, da irgendwie zu überleben, egal ob jetzt als Tier oder Mensch.
scarce food on the edges of the ice. This crushing freeze gripped the planet for thousands of years, pushing early human populations to the absolute brink of extinction before the world finally began to thaw. The Mega Flood Desert. Around 6 million years ago, a massive shift in Earth's tectonic plates literally cut off the Atlantic Ocean from the Mediterranean Sea, triggering one of the most extreme geographic collapses in history. With its primary water supply completely blocked at the Strait of Gibraltar, the Mediterranean became a trapped bowl. Because the region was incredibly hot, the water evaporated faster than rivers could refill it. Within just 1,000 years,
Interessant.
the entire Mediterranean Sea completely dried up. What was left behind was a giant, apocalyptic desert basin dropping over 2 miles below sea level. If you stood down there, it would feel like walking on the surface of another planet. The air pressure was so heavy it would make your ears pop constantly. And the
Wow.
temperature routinely soared past a blistering 130
Es
degrees Fahrenheit.
ist so heftig, wie viele Wandlungen die Welt einfach schon hatte, ne? Und wie viele wahrscheinlich noch kommen werden, wenn wir schon längst nicht mehr da sind.
The entire seafloor became a blinding white wasteland covered in a massive, mile-thick crust of pure salt. For over 500,000 years, this suffocating boiling abyss divided Europe and Africa. But the real terror came when the barrier finally broke. The tectonic wall at the Strait of Gibraltar began to crack, and the entire Atlantic Ocean came crashing in. It started as a massive waterfall, but the sheer force of the water quickly tore the canyon wide open, unleashing the unstoppable Zanclean flood. This wasn't a normal flood. It was a catastrophic wall of water moving at highway speeds, with a volume 1,000 times greater than the Amazon River. The roar of the incoming
So
ocean
krass
would have been
gewesen sein.
deafening from hundreds of miles away. The water ripped through the landscape with such violence that it filled the entire Mediterranean basin back up in less than 2 years, sometimes raising the water level by over 30 feet in a single day, instantly erasing everything in its path. The boiling hothouse. Around 56 million years ago, Earth experienced a sudden, terrifying spike in temperature that pushed the planet's climate to its absolute
Jetzt bin ich gespannt. Ist das der heiße Sommer, von dem die Boomer immer reden, als sie jung waren, dass da auch heiß war?
limit. A massive surge of carbon was injected into the atmosphere, likely triggered by intense volcanic eruptions and the sudden melting of frozen methane deposits on the seafloor. Within just a few thousand years, greenhouse gases shot up to extreme levels, causing global temperatures to skyrocket by up to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Because the planet was
Oh, diese
already
ganzen
completely
Amerikaner-Einheiten.
ice-free, this sudden heat spike transformed Earth into a hypertropical, suffocating hothouse. The global climate was turned entirely upside down. Palm trees and alligators began thriving in the Arctic, while the regions around the equator
Krass.
became completely unlivable. Temperatures there crossed 100 degrees with near 100% humidity.
Okay, komm, wir gucken nochmal Fahrenheit in Celsius. In Celsius, so. Also Bro hat gesagt 100, ne? Ja, okay, 100 Fahrenheit sind 37 Grad Celsius. Das ist ja jetzt ehrlich gesagt gar nicht so krass. Also, das ist jetzt nicht so heftig, to be honest.
Creating a wet bulb effect
Aber
that would
Prozent
instantly
Humanity
kill a
ist
human
natürlich
today.
eklig.
But the real horror was happening in the oceans. As the atmosphere absorbed the massive influx of carbon, a huge portion of it dissolved into the seawater. This triggered rapid ocean acidification, essentially turning the world's oceans into a giant corrosive bath of mild acid. The acid dissolved the protective shells of
ganz schön
marine
krass.
organisms, causing the entire deep-sea food chain to completely collapse. At the same time, the extreme heat starved the oceans of oxygen, triggering massive dead zones where fish and other marine creatures literally suffocated in the hot water. On land, the heat forced a bizarre evolutionary panic. Because resources became scarce and mammals couldn't shed heat efficiently, animals began to dramatically shrink in size. Early primitive horses shrunk down to the size of house cats, and ancient primates became miniature versions of themselves just to survive the grueling climate. This boiling nightmare gripped the planet for over 100,000 years.
37 Grad Celsius, so sieht's aus, leider.
A terrifying preview of what happens when
Ich frage mich aber langsam wirklich, ob das vielleicht einfach nur irgendwas mit KI geschrieben ist und einfach nicht stimmt. Oder ob das wirklich so war. Das ist halt leider das Problem, dass man das nicht mehr so genau sagen kann. Ich bin noch skeptisch, Leute.
Planet's atmospheric thermostat gets completely broken.
Gucken wir gleich, ob es noch irgendwelche crazy Dingens gibt. Irgendwelche crazy Sources dafür gibt überhaupt. Aber ich bin ehrlich gesagt
True
etwas
Kingdom
skeptisch.
Earth. Long before towering redwood trees or dense jungles existed, Earth's dry land was ruled by an entirely different kind of giant. During the Devonian period, about 400 million years ago, the planet's continents looked like a surreal nightmare landscape. If you walked on
Das war einfach Morrowind. Das ist einfach totales Leben.
land back then, you
Überall
would be
Pilze.
surrounded by a claustrophobic alien world. The very first land plants were tiny, primitive things standing only a few inches off the ground, but shooting up from the dirt were massive, trunk-like structures growing up to 26 feet tall and 3 feet wide. For over a century, scientists dug up these massive fossilized pillars and were completely stumped. They originally assumed they were ancient, weirdly shaped pine trees, but in 2007, a groundbreaking chemical analysis revealed a terrifying truth. These weren't trees at all. They were humongous, ancient fungi known as prototaxites. These
Voll
titanic
interessant.
mushrooms didn't have caps like modern toadstools. Instead, they stood like smooth, towering obelisks scattered across the barren earth.
Meint ihr, die waren
Imagine
lecker?
walking through a silent forest, where every single tree is actually a living, breathing fungal monster. The secret to their
Ich meine, Trees sind ja auch living und breathing. Also war jetzt gar nicht so ein großer Unterschied, glaube ich, vom Vibe.
massive size was a complete lack of competition. Because there were no large plant-eating animals on land yet, and no trees to block out the sun, these giant fungi were able to grow completely unchecked. They didn't need sunlight to survive. Instead, they acted like a global network of decomposers, slowly digesting rotting organic matter directly from the raw soil. However,
Ergibt Sinn.
their reign as the tallest structures on the planet didn't last forever. True plants eventually evolved deep root systems, wood and leaves, allowing them to shoot up toward the sky and steal the sunlight. By the late Devonian, the first true forests emerged, choking out the light, shading out the giant mushrooms, and driving this real-life horror kingdom to extinction. The Archean Eon. Long before plants turned our planet green, Earth may have gone through a vibrant purple phase. During the early Archean Eon, about
Weiß ich nicht, Bruder. Wie will man das überhaupt überprüft haben? Weißt du, wie ich meine?
3.5 billion years ago, the first microscopic life forms emerged in the oceans. Today, modern plants use a green pigment called chlorophyll to absorb sunlight and generate energy. But chlorophyll is a highly complex molecule, and back then, life hadn't invented it yet. Instead, scientists believe the dominant organisms on early Earth relied on a much simpler molecule called retinol, the exact same chemical our eyes use today to detect light, and this chemical changed the entire look of the planet. While green chlorophyll absorbs red and blue light and reflects green,
Das ist ganz schön
retinol does
interessant.
the exact opposite. It absorbs green light and reflects back a striking mixture of red and violet.
Okay, weißt du was? Ja, es könnte fast sein. Ja, das ist natürlich nur alles hypothetisch und so. Aber so eine Purple-Welt wäre schon irgendwie ein bisschen cool.
If you were looking down from orbit during this era, the vast shallow oceans wouldn't look blue or green. They would look like a deep swirling shade of lavender. But beneath the purple waves, a literal battle
Einfach Infektionswelt aus Terraria, ja.
for light was brewing. Newer, green-reflecting organisms eventually evolved, but they were forced to live beneath the massive floating mats of purple microbes. To survive in the shadows, these green microbes developed chlorophyll to catch the specific wavelengths of light that the purple microbes filtered out and ignored.
Das ergibt
It
natürlich
was a
Sinn.
brilliant survival strategy. Over millions of years, this green strategy proved to be way more efficient at making energy than the old purple method. The green microbes eventually took over the planet and won the war for sunlight, driving the ancient purple life into extreme high-salt environments where their descendants still live today. The toxic oxygen wasteland. Around 2.4 billion years ago, Earth experienced its deadliest planetary catastrophe. But it wasn't caused by a massive asteroid or a roaring supervolcano. It was triggered by a microscopic biological explosion. At the time, Earth was an alien world. The atmosphere had zero breathable oxygen, filled instead with toxic methane and carbon dioxide.
Je nach Perspektive ist es immer noch eine Alien World, nicht? Für eine andere Zivilisation irgendwo anders im Space sind wir ziemliche Aliens, glaube ich. Puh, Entschuldigung.
The oceans were dominated by ancient microbes that thrived in this suffocating environment.
Hm.
To them, oxygen wasn't life. It was a deadly, corrosive poison. Then, a new player evolved, cyanobacteria. This microscopic green bacteria invented a revolutionary biological trick called oxygenic photosynthesis. They began using sunlight to split water molecules for energy, releasing oxygen gas into the ocean as a completely accidental waste product. For millions of years, the planet
Interesting.
managed to defend itself. The ancient oceans were packed with dissolved iron, which acted like a giant chemical sponge. The moment the bacteria leaked oxygen, the iron soaked it up, rusted, and sank to the sea floor.
Ganz ehrlich, die Welt hat schon so viel durchgemacht und so viel abgefuckter Scheiß ist passiert anscheinend. Ich glaube, auch wenn wir Menschen schon lange weg sind, wird es die Welt noch so weitergeben. Die wird halt sich halt nur verändert haben. Und das Ding ist, was ein interessanter Gedanke ist, was auch in einigen Science-Fiction-Werken bearbeitet wird, wenn die Welt immer eine Lösung findet für ihre Probleme oder wenn die Natur sich so weiterentwickelt, dass eine Lösung gefunden wird für die Probleme, dann wird vielleicht auch irgendwann eine Lösung von der Erde entwickelt für uns Menschen, die so viel Scheiße machen. Das wäre crazy. Keine Ahnung, Mutter Erde holt Transformer aus ihrem Gestein und tötet uns. Ich weiß nicht. Wahrscheinlich wäre es nicht so filmreif, aber irgendetwas, ein Gas oder was auch immer.
Creating massive red rock formations. But this planetary buffer had a limit. Eventually, the iron ran out and the waters became totally saturated with gas. With nowhere else to go, the toxic oxygen began bleeding out of the water and rising into the sky. The results were apocalyptic. The gas acted like an environmental bleach in the atmosphere, triggering what scientists believe is the largest mass extinction in Earth's history. It wiped out an
Krass.
estimated 99% of all life on the planet, chemically burning the ancient microbes from the inside out. But the nightmare didn't stop there. As the oxygen filled the sky, it crashed into the atmospheric methane, the powerful greenhouse blanket that kept the planet warm. The oxygen tore the methane apart, turning it into weak carbon dioxide. Without its thick methane blanket, Earth's temperature instantly plummeted. The planet was plunged into its very first global ice age, locking the entire world in a brutal, crushing freeze that lasted for 300 million years. Snowball Earth. Around 700 million years ago, Earth looked nothing like it does today. There were no ice caps, no glaciers, and no frozen poles. Instead, the planet was a warm, open ocean world, dominated by one single massive supercontinent called Rodinia. But beneath the surface, a geological time bomb was ticking.
Rodinia, ja,
Rodinia
ja.
began to rip itself apart.
Hat man schon mal gehört, ne? Hat man schon mal gehört, dass mal ein großer Kontinent war. Also ein einzelner.
As the supercontinent cracked into smaller pieces, it created thousands of miles of brand new coastlines and exposed raw volcanic rock to the elements. This split triggered a deadly chain reaction in the sky. Mega monsoons began to batter these newly exposed rocks. As the rain washed over the volcanic stone, a massive chemical reaction took place. The rocks acted like a giant carbon trap, literally sucking carbon dioxide straight out of the atmosphere and burying it in the ocean floor. Without its heat blanket, the planet's temperature plummeted. As the world cooled, white ice caps began to form at the poles. And
Das ist
this
so
is where
interessant.
physics took over.
Wie viel Shit passiert sein muss, damit der Mensch überhaupt hier vernünftig leben kann, so wie er ist, ne? Also, das ist
As
crazy.
white ice
Das ist wirklich
acts like a
crazy.
giant mirror, it began reflecting up to 90% of the sun's heat right back into space. This created a terrifying, unstoppable loop. The more the planet froze, the more sunlight it rejected. And the
Ergibt
more
Sinn.
sunlight it rejected, the colder it got. Glaciers marched away from the poles and slammed shut at the equator, locking Earth in a 2-mile thick shell of ice. From space, Earth looked completely dead, a blindingly bright white marble. But deep beneath the ice, a hidden force was at work. Volcanoes never stopped erupting. For tens of millions of years, they
Volcanoes
choked
haben
the
uns einfach
atmosphere with
gerettet.
carbon dioxide.
Also die
Because the
Welt,
oceans
immerhin.
were frozen solid, they couldn't absorb the gas. The carbon dioxide built up to extreme levels, trapping heat like an ultra-powerful greenhouse. The planet warmed up so fast that it shattered the global ice sheets in a geological blink of an eye. The sudden, violent melting unleashed the most catastrophic hyperstorms the world has ever seen, permanently reshaping the future of life on Earth. The Great Dying. Around 252 million years ago, a massive chain of supervolcanoes began erupting through giant fissures in the crust, pumping out continuous flows of magma. They vomited enough lava to bury the entire
Danke für
United
den Pfeil,
States
der war
under
auch
more
ganz
than a
wichtig.
mile of molten rock. But the lava wasn't the main killer. As the magma blasted upward, it shattered through colossal underground deposits of coal.
Und Random Guna Spiel, let's go. Und dann ist wahrscheinlich alles
Essentially
explodiert.
set the planet's fossil fuels on fire. blasting trillions of tons of toxic gas straight into the sky.
Hm.
This sudden explosion of carbon dioxide triggered catastrophic global warming. Temperatures on land quickly soared past a lethal 120 degrees Fahrenheit. The extreme heat then transferred to the oceans, stripping the water of up to 80% of its oxygen and suffocating marine life en masse. But then, the disaster took an even more terrifying turn. With the oceans hot, stagnant, and starved of oxygen, a deadly new player emerged from the deep: anaerobic bacteria. These toxic microbes thrived in the dead water and began pumping out massive, invisible clouds of hydrogen sulfide gas. This toxic gas didn't stay in the water. It bled out into the atmosphere, wrapping the entire planet in a silent cloak of poison. If you
Das
were
ist super
standing on
interessant.
Earth back then, you wouldn't just burn from the heat, you would be choked to death by the very air you breathed. The gas was so potent it even rose up and dissolved the ozone layer, allowing lethal UV radiation from the sun to blast and
Der
mutate
kleine
the
Fratz.
surviving life
Oh
on the
nein.
surface. By the time the eruptions finally stopped, 96% of all marine species and 70% of all land animals were completely wiped out.
So
It
krank.
was the closest life on Earth ever came to total annihilation, leaving behind a scarred, empty world. The Hadean Eon. If you could travel back 4.5 billion years to Earth's earliest days, you wouldn't find a blue planet. Instead, you'd be looking at a glowing, hellish nightmare, a global, churning ocean of molten rock up to 200 miles deep. This was the Hadean Eon, where surface temperatures routinely topped 2,300 degrees Fahrenheit. That is hot enough to melt solid stone and turn iron into liquid rivers. This
Ja
extreme
gut,
heat came
crazy.
from three main sources: the crushing friction of gravity pulling the young world together, intense radioactive decay in the core, and a non-stop apocalyptic hammering by space debris. The sky wasn't blue either. It was a choking, heavy blanket of vaporized rock, carbon dioxide, and nitrogen,
Ja, gibt
creating
schon
an
Sinn.
atmospheric pressure 100 times heavier than what we feel today. But just as the planet
Imagine. Menschen schaffen es, eine Zeitmaschine zu machen, so, aber irgendwas läuft schief und sie traveln so weit zurück, dass sie einfach instant gekocht werden. Was für eine Riesenscheiße das wäre.
surface finally began to cool, it faced a literal world-ending event. A rogue Mars-sized planet named Theia came screaming out of the dark and smashed directly into Earth at 25,000 miles per hour. The impact
Holy
was so
shit.
violent it completely liquefied Earth's surface all over
Wir
again,
haben also Tier immer noch irgendwo auf unserer Erde.
turning the entire world back into a boiling ball of lava. It also blasted a massive ring of debris into orbit, which gravity clumped together to form our moon. For decades, scientists believed this ultimate smash-up left Earth as a boiling wasteland for hundreds of millions of years. They assumed no liquid water could possibly exist. But they were wrong. The planet had a secret locked away in its rocks. The proof comes from tiny indestructible crystals called zircons found in Western Australia. These microscopic time capsules are older than the continents themselves, and they actually survived the magma ocean.
Als
Their
ob.
chemistry reveals a shocking truth. Despite the planetary collision, Earth managed to cool down, form its very first solid crust, and fill its liquid water oceans way ahead of schedule, setting the stage for life much earlier than anyone dreamed.
Und dann endet es einfach. Okay. Also es waren ein paar ganz interessante Dinge, wie gesagt, heute, ne, wo so viele Leute einfach KI was schreiben lassen und so. Ich bin mir nicht sicher, ob das alles so stimmt. War aber auf jeden Fall eine spannende Geschichte. Wir gucken mal, ob es irgendwelche Sources gibt oder so. Nee. Sieht nicht so aus. Also wer weiß, ob das alles so gestimmt hat. Ein paar Sachen glaube ich schon. Die haben schon ein bisschen Sinn ergeben, finde ich. Aber ich weiß nicht. Ich bin da erstmal ein bisschen vorsichtig, Leute. Vielleicht steht ja irgendwas in den Kommentaren, was gut ist. Green Purple Gang wasn't still. Ja, okay. Viele Menschen scheinen es einfach so zu glauben, aber I don't know. Just pointing out that you say scientists don't think higher oxygen level are completely the cause. Also selbst wenn das alles legit ist, so, die Menschen, die heute leben, können es ja nicht genau wissen. Ne? Also man muss ja immer alle Sachen in Betracht ziehen, alle Beweise. Entsprechend, wer weiß, ob das wirklich so stimmt, wie Bro jetzt erzählt hat, aber ja. Wie gesagt, ich bin skeptisch. Ich bin ein skeptischer Kerl. Was soll ich euch erzählen? Ich hoffe, das Video hat euch trotzdem gefallen. Ich fand es trotzdem interessant. Ich würde es auf jeden Fall verlinken. Und ja, Dankeschön fürs Zugucken. Und haut rein. Bye, bye.